Hello and welcome to this edition of Frankly Speaking with Lynne Franks and Friends. I'm Lynne Franks, your host. And this week I'm sitting down with my boundary-busting friend, Vivien Goldman, aka Professor of Punk at New York University. Vivien is a writer, a singer, a performer, a TV producer. There is virtually nothing that Vivien hasn't done in the music industry since she started as a writer many moons ago. I think it's incredible that this week she is releasing her first solo album, produced by world-famous top producer Youth, and is doing live performances across the East Coast of America. She is a legend in her own lifetime. So welcome, Vivien. Hello, and today I am delighted to welcome my good friend, Vivien Goldman, Professor of Punk, journalist, author, visionary, director of TV shows, and altogether a legend in her own time. And now a performer, well, always a performer, I guess, and now even more, because she's got an album coming out any second. And here you are in Jamaica, because I can see that beautiful background, where you've been for most of lockdown, haven't you?
Even pre-lockdown, Lynn, you know, what can I say? Destiny plucked me from Jackson Heights, Queens, and deposited me here in Jamaica. And at a certain point, the area where I live, Jackson Heights, Queens, really was the epicenter of the virus. And our local hospital, Elmhurst, was on TV shows all around the world as the epicenter of troubled hospitals in the virus. So as I was able to stay here, guess what? I did. So, you know.
Oh, that's been a couple of years now.
It's a year, about a year and a half. I've been back in between, but I've been mainly been here. Yeah. Oh, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been living in New York for how long now? Since 1990?
Since 1990. That's why you haven't seen me as much.
I know. I mean, I remember every time I would go to New York, which used to be very frequent, we would always hang out, but certainly haven't seen you much in London. Of course, you were, like me, a Northwest London girl. And I was thinking, I'm sure when you went to New York, you only went for a brief period and you were coming back.
That has been really my MO. I did originally go to Paris in that way and stay there for about 2.5 years. And same thing with New York. And funnily enough, it's clearly a pattern because I've just done it again in Jamaica.
Yeah.
You know.
And what a great life you have. And you are amazing about manifesting, and not just manifesting from nowhere, but putting the hard work in that goes with it. The most incredible initiatives and career, actually. So let's start from the beginning, because your story really has to be told. You started off was your first music job as PR to Bob Marley? Is that the very first one? And how the hell did you get that?
Okay, I had just left Warwick University, and you know, music was absolutely the focus of our lives. And I was a Londoner, and you'll get this, Lynn. I was coming out of Tottenham Court Road Tube, and there was a girl handing out those free magazines. And I looked in it, and it said, you know, something like editorial assistant required or secretary required. And they were on Dean Street over a strip club. It was completely, you know, absolute beginner, seedy Soho. And I got that job, and I soon was writing the whole magazine called Cassettes and Cartridges. But then actually they brought in a new editor, and we had this big fight. He said to me, I wanted a tea girl. I wanted a secretary. You know, why are you trying, you know, writing the whole magazine? I was like, okay. He said, horses for courses. And I left and actually just became a full-time writer. Yeah.
And then how did you get involved with Bob Marley? Because that was extraordinary for a start.
Well, that was definitely, you could say, a little touch of jar, wasn't it? It was through work. As I said, I was at Warwick University in the early 1970s. And it was just that time when Island Records was starting to put out Bob Marley and the Wailers in an international rock-oriented way. And I had been working at another company called Transatlantic Records on Baker Street. That was very interesting. It did a lot of jazz. I got to work with people like McCoy Tyner and Flora Purim and a lot of folk. But then I was lured away by Island, and I had
was that in the days of Chris Blackwell? Must have
Yeah,
been.
absolutely.
Who is your
absolutely.
great friend and neighbour in Jamaica, of course.
And yeah, I remember it all very clearly because I got that job at Island. The girl who was there knew me and brought me in, and I had an interview and I got the job. And when I think about it, like now, for example, at the moment, they're making, say, a documentary about the group Sparks. That was kind of a lesser known group at the time, but super hip. What I'm trying to say is that that brief 7 months I worked in Ireland, 7 months, was so lucky because I got to work with such a great, interesting cross-section of musicians. All the reggae people, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Burning Spear, got to help with Aswad, who are my homeboys in Ladbroke Grove, and so on. And then, you know, people like Sparks and Robert Palmer. It really was, as they say, at the cutting edge and super progressive at that time, Ireland. And then I was offered a job by the late Alan Lewis, who actually just passed on, who died just now, and they've had a lot of obituaries. You know, he was a pioneering music editor who went on to found things like Kerrang, that became very big. Anyway, he gave me, I'd written for him at Black Music magazine, and he gave me a job full-time on Sounds, where I eventually became features editor.
And I want to just ask you about that because, of course, I've been reading your fantastic book, Revenge of the She-Punks, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. But this whole area of where women sat at that point in the music industry was not a particularly healthy space. And we are going to go into much more detail about feminism in the music industry. But how did you become features editor of Sounds, which was, let's face it, a white boys newspaper? It was populated by young white journalists who went for a certain type of music. And there you were, this hip, very hip Jewish girl from Northwest London who suddenly becomes their boss, actually.
And they didn't like that at all, I have to say.
I'm not surprised.
Well, I'll be really honest with you, Lynn, as A, I'm always really honest, and B, it's us.
Us and all the people listening to this.
Oh yeah, that's true, that's true. But actually it was some advice from Caroline Coon, the great feminist artist and writer, that helped me nail it, because they had me as acting features editor there at the lower pay for a long time. You know how they like to do that if they can. And I was a bit cheesed off. And it was Caroline who said to me, you know, you've got to go in there and confront him. It's not right. So being a nice Jewish girl from Golden Sweet, I had no clue how to get in touch with my anger. I only knew how to be more helpful and present than the next nice girl. So trying to channel that into my, into me. I remember so clearly, I grabbed Alan Lewis by the shoulders and I sort of gently nudged him against the wall. And I went very close to him and I said, look around this room. Who else is going to be features editor but me? I've already been doing it for months. Give me the job. Give me the money I deserve. And he did, actually.
Good for him.
He did, yeah. And I stayed there till ideological differences, when he became very much more involved in kind of more right-wing punk and much more sort of macho laddish stuff. We met in his love of soul music that he had as a child, which is what made him start Black Music magazine. But, all good. At a certain point,
from there, you went from Sounds, you then were working with NME and all those papers, weren't you?
They all poached me, actually. Yeah, I think I'm the only one who worked for all three of them. They all poached me. It's sweet to look back on, isn't it?
Isn't it? And so not only did you work for the three major music newspapers of the 70s, but you were a woman to boot, which they really weren't employing. I mean, we know that Judy Burchill and a few others started in those ways, but you were the one that had these quite serious responsibilities and roles with all of them, which is fantastic. And from there, how did it devolve from there? What were you doing? Because you had at that point started making your own music as well, which is a very, very distinct shift from everybody else. Did Chrissie Hynde work on one of those papers at one point? I'm just
Chrissie. I met her Chrissie. I met her as a fellow journalist in a record cupboard of RCA. I remember both getting our free albums to go and sell.
Yes. And Chrissy's told me some of the ways that she financed her recordings in those days, which we won't go into. But
and one of them was living at mine, saving rent. Really? having
Amazing.
Friday night dinner with my mummy on Finchley Road. Yeah, Chrissy.
Brilliant. It was a great time, wasn't it?
So many ways. You know, there was so much less pressure on space for a start, which is one of the reasons, you know, one of the things that really helps to build a kind of healthy underground of people being able to collaborate and so on, is to have the space in which to do it. And that's just one of the areas in which the sort of 1%ification of the big cities has led to sort of a street level culture often being crowded out.
Yes, and you've written a lot about that in the Revenge of the Sheepunks, about this sort of street culture in all over the world, in cities from Berlin, New York, San Francisco, South America, Eastern Europe. I mean, it's the same everywhere, and of course London. But let's go back to your own career in performing. At the same time as you were writing about others, you were recording your own material.
Yes, it's true. Guilty as charged. No, you see, it's because it was that punk thing. I mean, the honest truth is, going back again to being a nice Jewish girl from Golders Green, because it's so, you know, maybe you call it out of me, but it's the reality. Honestly, my father was a musician, right? My father was a violin player before he went into the schmutter trade. And we did all used to hang around the old Joanna and sing together. And I was the bossy boots that arranged my big sister's harmonies. But I promise you, I never thought, even when I was a music writer, I didn't really think of making music myself, even though I always heard it in my head and I could sing. And I think it was because I'd never seen a girl do it really, or a girl like me. Whereas we all knew, like, there was Jane Austen, George Eliot, we'd all heard of women writers. Do you know what I mean? I really think I was that obtuse. And then I wrote that article, the first Women in Rock article. And I remember, honestly, Lynne, I genuinely was gobsmacked. I went into this gig and I thought it was like one of those long-haired blokes playing guitar. And as I got closer to the stage, I was like, oh my goodness, it's a girl. And I was like, boing. And then punk began, and you started to have more women on the scene. So instead of being just kind of used to being the embattled, pretty much only girl with Caroline Coon, you know, I started to have, like, there was a posse of us. You know, there was the Slits, the Raincoats, Nena Cherry.
Polystyrene, you write about a lot.
Lovely polystyrene.
Yeah.
You know, the movement, right, of she-punks had a terrific blow with the deaths very close together, both of breast cancer, of polystyrene, and Ari Up. They were sort of our leaders in a way. And they were both carried away by breast cancer within a very short space of time with each other.
Very sad. But leaving a huge legacy behind them, both of them, which you've written about so much in this fantastic book, Revenge of the Sheepunks. And the difference with this is you're not only writing as an observer, as a witness, a journalist witness, but you were there. You were one of the Sheepunks. And that's what's so amazing about this, and how interesting it is. And of course, one of my favorite stories would be you going shopping with Patti Smith and her buying you a jacket, which you describe and which I have seen you wear so many times, that quilted blouson-y jacket. Now I know why you wear it all the time.
Actually, I did. I only wore it some of the time because the cut was not that great, Lynne.
Yeah, but I have seen you in it though.
I was very fond of it though, still.
Yeah, well, that was very cool. So there you were, you're living in Ladbroke Grove, you've got Chrissie Hynde as your tenant, free tenant on the sofa, you're making music of your own type of music, and at the same time you're going to all these gigs, you are making sure that women musicians are written about in the newspapers and magazines that you're writing for. And I remember, I think there's in this book you actually talk about that you wanted to write a story about women in music, and one of them said, but we've had our women in music story this year. And I remember years ago we were talking about a TV show about the goddess, years and years ago. Do you remember? And you had a conversation then with Alan Yentop, who was running the BBC at that point, and he said to you then, and I don't know how long ago, it must have been at least 20 years ago, he said, but Vivien, we've done our program on women this year. When you think about it, that is unbelievable, isn't it? That, you know, it wasn't so long ago. Well, I guess it was actually.
Honestly, I could I could almost cry when I think about it, to be honest, you know. But I mean, but we don't let ourselves cry, or only for about a minute of a second. But yeah, it's very, 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 very brutal when you think about it. How, you know, and I'm only talking about, you know, the developed world here, you know, Europe, America. I'm not even going to the whole rest of the world. But I'm just saying that we've been excluded, and it's just was taken automatically for granted that we would be excluded in, you know, in the arts. I mean, again, writing was a little area we had a little more play, you know, the Bronte sister, you know, there was a little more heritage, but you know, it was established that women wrote a long time ago. But if you
we had Jermaine Greer, who of course was your tutor at Warwick, wasn't she?
Yeah,
which must have been fantastic.
Definitely. But even actually, she disapproved of me quite a lot.
Actually, she's quite a difficult woman. I have to say, when I said that, I thought my little connection with her wasn't easy. But yeah, I can imagine she did. But you know, there are great women writers out there. But the fact that the women in the music industry were expected to be the backing sisters, although let's talk about Carole King and the music she wrote back in the day.
No, of course, there's always been great
the brick building.
Yes. But I'm talking about, it's not the same as when you talk about the she-punks, is it? No. Okay, now Carole King, obviously genius, very clever, slots into that world, you know, in the Brill building. And there's in the Brill building,
but she still got ripped off by her husband and treated badly. And she was still the little girl in the corner at the piano while Jerry Goffin was out there, as I've seen the film, based on her film? And the show.
No, I want to see
beautiful.
The film.
There's a show. There was a show in London on the stage for years called Beautiful. I think that's what it's called. It was her story. And then when she was in Hyde Park about 5 years ago, live, did an incredible concert. I'm a huge fan of Carole King. She had the cast from the show Beautiful in London on the stage with her, doing all this, some of the song. And she had her daughter on the stage. It was amazing. I love Carole King. I mean, some of those early people, you know, Joni Mitchell, Carole King.
But that is the
Joan Baez.
You're homing in on it now. Somebody like Joan Baez or Joni Mitchell, that was always the acceptable face of female performers. You know, it's as if,
and they were brilliant.
You know, not only they were brilliant because they wouldn't have got through unless they were completely brilliant, but it was also what we were expected to do since the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, when we would be in the living room performing at the harpsichord or the spinet for everybody's amusement, you know, being the background music. And that was expected of a girl. However, I promise, if you look at the whole history of women in pop, I mean, unless you're going to look at something like Olivia, the lesbian feminist label on the West Coast from the 1970s, otherwise, you know, it's pretty much all completely dictated by the fellows. And when it comes to the music of our lifetime that we've lived, it was quite a reductive view of basically what they thought was fuckable, you know, that they could try and, you know, get behind the couch. And, you know, so it was a very reductive view. And
it was the view of women in the adverts, all in tiny mini skirts and bouffant hair, like madmen, putting the Hoover over the carpet. And even if you look at the groups like the Ronettes or Supremes or whatever, they were little dolly birds, little pretty black dolly birds.
Where's the self-determination? Where's the agency?
Yeah.
You know, so that only comes in with punk.
Yes.
As far as it goes, given, I don't want to make it sound like a fantastic wonderland because the struggle was there, but at least women were more involved, hands-on with the struggle. Plus, despite those, you know, idiots I worked with who used to say, women don't make music, women don't buy music, we don't need to cover women's music. You know, the fact remains that among the artists themselves, there was an appreciation for this new generation of women. You know, that's why you had the friendship, you know, between the Clash and the Slits and so on and so forth. The guys were pretty glad to see us, to be honest, on the musical creative side. It was more in the industry. They, you know, they used to just, women be something that can be recycled, you know, planned obsolescence. You get in some sort of virtually prepubescent girl, you know, and her shelf life is meant to be shorter than her miniskirt, you know, and then they're disposed of, unless you've really got the sticking power, because if you've got this, you've really got something to say. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And the atmosphere was so different in punk. I mean, pre-punk, I would say one of the most successful women in music in our world was Dusty Springfield. Dusty got to call the shots.
Yeah.
Why? Because everybody loved Dusty. So if you were Dusty level, you had more agency, and she got to do quite a lot of what she wanted to do. But even then, she wasn't, well, obviously now she would probably play it quite differently, because she
didn't come out publicly.
Yes,
she kept her life very hidden.
Yes, which it does take a toll.
Of course, it must have been a huge strain. And of course, she also died of breast cancer, so sadly, as well. But there were some great women that came through that scene, like we've mentioned Chrissie Hynde, like Annie Lennox. There were others, I'm sure you've mentioned them in your book, from the kind of coming out of that punk scene into the sort of full-on performance. In America, there were a number of them, all of which I've blanked on at the moment, but you know them all.
Well, Patty's still working.
Oh, Debbie, Patti Smith, I just love. Debbie,
but also
Harry,
people like the Bush. What I found in the book was that it wasn't only me that was thinking of doing music again in a slightly more open climate. It was also people like the Bush Tetras and ESG, quite a few women from back in the day, maybe emboldened by new access to technology and the new zeitgeist, are stepping forward.
And the influence.
Music.
You talked about the influence of those women bands from those days in something like the Pussycat Girls in Russia.
Pussy Riot.
Pussy Riot, sorry, yes.
Yes, it's true. But the thing is, they did, really, I think, pop is a very disposable medium, but I would argue, and I do in the book, that the industry was happier to drop the women by the roadside than even the rest of the other pop groups. And there was that period, post-punk, and post-punk indeed, in the 1980s, when I myself went into television. And it really was like all our work, they'd been successful in erasing it, which is the old patriarchal game, erasure of the female contribution.
But there were some great women like Madonna, who would say it as it was, and Beyonce, who indeed is still saying it as it is.
No, I'm saying in the 80s.
Okay, I've lost track of the decades.
No, sorry, I was talking about immediately post-punk.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And then a lot of that work, was very, very marginalized until the Riot Girls started in the 1990s, and eventually a bridge was built between us. So that whole, women of outrage, which is sort of punk.
Yes.
That spirit, we had a lot of Martha and the Muffins, lots of artists in the 80s, obviously.
Yes.
But that, that confrontational, that.
And then what about the lovely Nana Cherry, who you're very friendly with, the whole family? I mean, when did Nana start? Well, she was with the Smiths, and then
Nana is a living bridge between so many cultures and musics, and she did. She herself was brought up between LA, Sweden, and New York, and a bit in London. So she was a very cosmopolitan person, but she arrived in London as a young teenager and got immediately involved in the punk scene. But the jazz and the free jazz was always completely part of her. And she was also a New York, LA person. So she owned hip hop too. So since then, she's always been an experimenter. But she's an extraordinary artist, not only in that she's that good and creative, but also she exists sort of at the nexus of these forms,
She really does.
She grew up in all of these forms.
Well, of course, her stepfather was Don Cherry, famous jazz trumpeter, and Ornette Coleman was. I went to a concert once, South Bank, which she was at actually, with Andy Oliver, her great friend and our great friend, who is now a top television chef, among other things.
TV celebrity chef.
And the girls were there in the front row, and it was Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry. It was the most amazing concert. So that was her world. And then she came in and became a Buffalo girl, and then she made that incredible single with Yasin Adur, which is 3 minutes away.
Seven seconds.
3 seconds. God, my brain is gone.
7 seconds actually.
7 seconds. I've heard it so many times.
That song, I don't know whether you know this, but that particular song was voted Song of the Century by the nation of France.
Yeah, I did know because it's in your book. But I mean, I love that. I saw Nana play it at you, sir, actually perform it with you, sir. I was in Switzerland for a women's conference, and by a fluke, they were in the same hotel, and she was performing with him that night. And to see them in a small theatre right in the front row, she got me a ticket, and to see them do that live was just one of the experiences in my life, which is wonderful. And of course, now she and her husband, Cameron Mcvey, have got their wonderful daughter, Mabel, who's now become a top star. It's wonderful seeing these generational sort of women going through, the daughters of, which is beautiful to see.
And not only that, but also Tyson and Naima, the other daughters, also do music, not in that pop mode. They do more like avant-garde type music, and but they're also getting acclaim, not in the same way like a huge pop, but in their way, in their right way, for the more experimental stuff. The whole family,
so talented. I know you've talked about Tyson a lot in the book here, and obviously worked closely. That's fantastic. Yeah. So you had yourself an extraordinary career. You also had friendships with some of the most interesting people. You went to see, listen to, and watch the performance of incredible artists, and then you started your television career. So let's talk about that, because that was another amazing initiative, that Big World Cafe. I mean, what an amazing program. My favorite program since, before, and now, always.
Oh gosh.
How did you get it?
Oh gosh, I'm getting verklempt here. If you don't know it, look it up.
Channel 4, thank you, Channel 4.
Yeah, no, what happened was, it literally was that moment where I had the new wave duo Chantage in Paris.
Oh yes, let's talk about that too.
With my good friend Eve Blois. And then I really wanted to come back to London, and she agreed to move back to London with me, and we were going to launch Chantage there. But then life intervened. Her mother became very sick. One thing, she had to go back and look after her. And so then I started getting offered this television work. And I honestly, look at the music scene. I was in my early 30s. What was the jollies for me there? Only to be completely obscure of the regular industry. There wouldn't be any space for me, because that's the way they looked at females, artists. So I really jumped at the chance to work in independent television. And I formed a partnership with a guy called Nick Sawyer, and we called it Spellbound. And I was so involved in what was starting to be called world music. So that was what I was dreaming of and pushing for. And the timing was right. And we got that slot for Big World Cafe. And then
explain a bit about the programs, what that Big World Cafe looked like for those who didn't see it.
And it's not even online, and I don't.
Isn't really it? I was just going to ask. Is it on YouTube?
And I don't really have copies of it because I don't know what happened to the person who's meant to. I don't remember anymore. I don't have copies of all the shows.
Yeah,
but the point was, and people let you down who were meant to be regularly copying it.
And we didn't have digital, did we?
We had VHSs. We had VHSs.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of.
But we weren't sitting there like we are now with our phones, photographing and filming. I've lost so much of my archive because it disappeared on the way.
And it was hard. It wasn't always easy. Somebody had to be home to set the machine, and it was all.
But the Big World Cafe, as you say, was world music.
Yes,
it was sort of a club environment. It felt like a club when you were actually watching it.
Actually held at the Brixton Academy, courtesy of Spencer Style.
Yeah, which I ended up doing PR for after that. I'm trying to remember whether I was actually at one of them or just watching them. I can't remember. It's all a blur, but I just know it was fantastic. And you had the best music. I mean, I guess the nearest we can watch that sort of music now is when WOMAD is on, which it unfortunately has got put off this year. But when WOMAD live events are on, that's the nearest, or some of BBC Three sometimes. But there was nothing on television that showed these incredible musicians, literally from all over the world, so talented.
And mixed in with the pop of the day, at the time, the Beautiful South were big. We had them on with Nana Vasconcelos, the Brazilian percussionist. And the gentleman who recently died, one of the founders of Kassav, the group Kassav, Jacob Desvarieux. Now, a lot of people don't know about Kassav. Do you know about Kassav?
No, never heard of him.
They're one of the hugest groups now in the French-speaking world, but that's again the old colonial divisions. Anyway, so Kassav was a kind of amazing, huge band coming from Guadeloupe. And literally they've gone on all these years since the 80s to now, and their leader, as I said, just died. But they were a massive band in numbers, and they were so incredible. And I was so honored to premiere them on Big World Cafe. And, you know, and then they went on for decades to be a, you know, dominant group in the world, not in the Anglophone world. But now I'm not sure. I mean, they have Jules Holland, which a lot of people said at the time was like an offshoot of Big World Cafe. You know,
I was thinking that's the nearest I've ever seen.
Yes.
Anything like Big World Cafe would be Jules Holland's Late Show.
Yes, yeah. And he definitely, there was some overlap in the crew. So, you know, we were first and he got the gig. So it goes, it's all right. It's all good. Yeah.
It's all good. And then after the Big World Cafe came to an end, sadly came to an end, what was happening then? Because you were still performing with Eve, were you?
No. You see, I'd stopped that when I went into television. I said, oh, that was it. You know, I've been in the Flying Lizards, you know, I did that record.
Of course, you were in the Flying Lizards.
I was a Flying Lizard. Then I made that record with Johnny Rotten, you know, and I had Chantage, you know. I felt I'd done quite a lot. And I felt, you know, what I honestly felt was that nothing could take the music away from inside me. And if the whole situation wasn't attractive enough for me to want to go and spend time, all my time, fighting that system, because I had plenty of other things to do, but I would always still be a musician. That's why it's sort of cute that literally, I didn't realize this, but the newspapers put it together 40 years after I put out what's now called a post-punk classic, Launderette. 40 years. Now I've put out my first album.
And this is your first solo album that's come out this week, and produced by our friend Youth, who's so brilliant and talented, the most talented music producer really in the world. And so you brought these tracks together. We're going to actually hear one of them in a minute. I asked you which track we should play, if we can work out the technology to do that. And you suggested that we should have the one that is a disco feminist anthem, really, that makes us dance around the room. And we decided that dancing around the room to a feminist anthem is just what we need these days. So what's that one called?
It's called My Bestie and My BFF.
Love it.
We're gonna get even further.
so you went to New York for a few months, and you've been there now for how long? When you're not in Jamaica?
What's 1990 to now? That would
so it's 32 years, nearly?
No.
Yeah.
No, really?
Yeah,
Oh
I know. I feel the same. And I look at I know we've been going a long time, you and I, and many of our contemporaries, and we've done a lot of stuff, and we're still there doing it, which is wonderful.
I didn't intend to stay in New York that long, actually. You caught me on the hop there. I had no idea I'd be in New York.
I know you always said you were coming back. You always told me you were coming back. But anyway, so you stayed in New York a long time, and in that period, you've been writing for a lot of very well-respected American publications, as well as producing a number of books. So you've worked with the Village Voice. I mean, you've written for loads
New York
of them.
Times. Yeah, loads of them. I don't know where to begin. Loads of them.
All of them, basically.
I suppose the main thing in terms of evolution from my UK self, where I was also writing for people, is the teaching. And I think that has probably changed me quite a lot, becoming a professor, or should I say adjunct professor, to be more exact. But
so you are at New York, NYU, is it? You're a professor of, what's your formal title?
Oh, I'm actually within the organization, we're called instructors, but outside we're called professors. And so I'm an adjunct professor because, I'm kind of very freelance type person. So
yeah, and you're an adjunct professor
me.
of punk and reggae at NYU, basically.
Yes. I mean, to be honest, they don't really give you titles like that, but people have given me that title because that's what I teach. We're not anyway, cut to the chase, blah. Yeah, they call me the punk professor. The first course I did there was punk, and they did approach me and ask me what I wanted to teach. And I looked around, I remember so clearly, we were sitting on Houston Street in this cafe. And I don't know whether you remember, but the other side of Broadway, there used to be that massive neon whale on the wall of a garage. It was all very characterful. And it had that little tiny greengrocer's stall on the other side of the big main road in the heart of town. But anyway, as I looked at it, everything was gone, like in terms of all the cute stuff, the charming stuff that made New York, New York. It had all been knocked down. And there were these completely architecturally undistinguished buildings. You just can't even tell one from the other.
You could be talking about London, to be honest.
Yes. And so then I looked at the guy who's my mentor, Jason King, Dr. Jason King, in case he was there. So anyway, I said to him, punk is what we need. Otherwise everything is just going to be completely homogenized out of any interest whatsoever. And that punk course, what can I say? 2005 to the present day. I'm about to teach it shortly, but every year it does change. Every year it does change, and the students, have a different vibe, and it's become so interesting,
The students must love it, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they do. I think they do love it.
Yeah. Because so presumably not just girls. Your students of all genders.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. No. What an incredible benefit to young people.
I'm not at Henrietta Barnett for the Daughters of Gentlefolk anymore. Dear listener, let me explain. She knows that's where I went to school, a single-sex school. Henrietta Barnett. No, NYU's not Henrietta Barnett.
No, I know. But the only reason I say that is I would have thought a lot of young women would be very attracted to what you do, because you are talking about the emancipation of women in the music industry. A very hard struggle, I may say.
Oh gosh, so true. But on the other hand, Lynn, as we know so well, try to, help free up females is just a pointless task unless you can free up the males along with it.
That's true.
You just can't have one without the other. I'm personally not a separatist. I can understand the reasons why, women or people of a certain melanin might want to go off now and again and just huddle together for a bit. But to me, it's all subservient to all of us being able to. Sorry, let me drink some tea. all of us being able to communicate better.
Well, it's about a world of cooperation, and it's a world of cooperation between men and women, although I do think we do have to respect each other's differences. And let's not forget about the very big importance and dialogue that's going on right now of Black Lives Matter, which thank God it is finally going on and should have been going on for a lot longer. And in every country, how appallingly people of Afro-Caribbean descent have been treated. And at last, I hope the world is waking up to the extreme treatment that's been going on. And of course, you've been working with Black musicians your whole career. So, I mean, it's something you're very aware of. And in fact, on that note, I just want to point out that apart from this fantastic book, you have written some incredible books about Bob Marley, the Book of Exodus, which was a big success, and The Black Chord, Visions of the Groove, which I love, connections between Afrobeats, and you've written a Jamaican recipe book based on dishes from Pearl Bell, a Kid Creole and the Coconuts. She's Chris Blackwell's cook. Oh, I could do with some of that right now. And King Creole and the Coconuts, who you were always very close with. And did you do a musical with him or something?
Yes, and you know, honestly, and you might have some brilliant ideas for this, Lynn, because obviously we were always hoping it would open in London too, / England. And they were in talks when the COVID hit. Now it's all gone a bit bonkers. But if anybody listening would like to see the really amusing kid and delightful to dance to Kid Creole musical in your local theatre, drop a line to Lynne and she'll tell me.
I've always been a huge fan of Kid Creole. I used to go and see them every time they came over and were playing. At the moment, the British theatre scene is very, very, it's going through a really hard time. And it's only just reopening, and they've had really a very, very tough few years. And you get people like Andrew Lloyd Webber who can't even get his new show opening on time. You know, you can tell how difficult it is. So it's just, you know, it's going to be another difficult year or so at least. But anyway, so that's huge amount of work with your books, huge amount of work with your writing, now very much the punk professor, as you put it. And let's bring it up to date with the album that's coming out at this very moment, as we've already mentioned it. So talk about your first solo album, which you have brought out after how many decades in the music industry? 5 at least. And now you've got your solo album. I love it.
It really arose in a very human way. And what happened was in 2016, this guy in Europe had contacted me wanting to put out an anthology of my old music from the early 1980s. And a couple of people had asked me before, but this guy just felt right. And so we did it, and lo and behold, it fell on fertile ground. I mean, that music did quite nicely at the time, considering it was little indie stuff, it really did. But it got so much attention. I was like, I can't believe it. Maybe I should have never stopped and gone into television. So then I started to be offered shows. Now, when I was in the Flying Lizards, to be honest, you know some of us, David Cunningham, David Toop, Steve Beresford, we were too cool to go and stand poncing about on stage in funny clothes just for other people's entertainment. We were too busy being cool in the studio. So literally, you know, when I was asked to perform, it was sort of the first time I'd really performed on the back of this album, Resolutionary. And I was with Youth. We were on this job together in Jamaica. I told him, I've been asked to do this big show in Berlin on a Saturday night. It's huge. They want me to perform for an hour, but I don't have an hour's worth of songs. But I was just telling Youth, and we were just laughing like you are, because it was so funny. And then he said, well, I'll do a couple of songs with you. So we did the couple of songs, and he was like, this is fabulous. Let's carry on. So we just made this album. So it wouldn't have happened without Youth.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. And so the album's come out now. I will put details with this podcast of how people can download it from Spotify or wherever else they get it from. And so what next? I know you're just on your way back to New York. You'll be teaching the next group of young students lucky enough to hear your words of wisdom and all the incredible experiences you have. Have you got any thoughts about where you're going next? Because you've always got projects on, I know. What would you say?
You know, honestly, part of the thing when I came to Jamaica and stayed in Jamaica was I seriously wanted to work very hard. you know, on my work and to improve. So I'm here trying to improve, and I'm writing a lot and singing.
Wonderful.
And I'm just finishing a project that's going to come up maybe even before the end of the year about Fela Kuti. And it's a project I've done with his artist, Ghariokwu Lemi. And I've been able to put in print for the first time, you know, well, I've done articles, but in a longer form, my feelings about Fela, you know, what I learned about Fela, listening to him, hanging with him on the road with him, and then teaching about him. And in this conjunction with his artists. So I'm looking forward to that. You know, I just really hope to do more of the same, honestly. I was actually thinking it might be nice to explore a bit of TV again. I was just
thinking that. Well, the other thing we were talking about before we started recording was, of course, that like me, you've become a Buddhist in your later life, and you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo as I do.
Yes, I really do.
Also know how powerful it is as a manifestation vibration that brings things in if we put the action and the activity to put them out there. So combination of you in this beautiful place like Jamaica, chanting, eating wonderful food, having a great time, and being creative. I mean, anything could come out, really, anything at all. I can't wait. So. I can't wait. So thank you very much for the time. I wish I was there in Jamaica with you. It looks so gorgeous. Here I am in Somerset. Not so bad here.
Not so bad. Somerset is super cool.
It's very cool. And I hope you'll come for a visit next time you're over. And this is the amazing thing about this lockdown, that we're all on Zoom and it's become normal.
It hasn't been, you know, normally my life here, the way I actually live it, to be honest, it might have been like extremely lonely, right? To the point of not very healthy. But it really hasn't been like that. I have a little bit of human companionship, but honestly, it's the Zoom and the connection that we can have, seeing each other's expressions and everything. Totally. After we hang up, don't we feel as if we'd gone out for lunch together?
Yeah, absolutely. And probably spoken more. And in fact, we spent your birthday spending a little bit of time together because our mutual friend Spencer Style arranged all of us to come in and wish you happy birthday on Zoom, and that was really lovely.
Really precious. It made my day, and this is making my day too. Thank you so much, Lynne.
All right, darling. Well, God bless you and good luck with it all, and I hope to see you at some point in Somerset in between all your busy, wonderful projects. Lots of love. God bless you.
Lots of love. Goddess bless you.
Goddess bless you. Absolutely. Big kiss.
So as you've just heard, Vivien believes that there's never a time limit on busting your boundaries, as do I. So this week's seed exercise is about busting your boundary. Vivien and I are both Buddhists, and we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to manifest the changes we want in our life and to manifest the energy and enthusiasm and passion to do it. But any way you like, why not use this week to bust a boundary? Thank you so much for listening and taking part. Remember, we will be putting up episodes every 2 weeks, and we hope to have you back with us again soon. If you like what you hear and want to learn more practical methods to help you plant the seeds in your own empowerment journey, then please subscribe to this podcast, rate it and review. Also, make sure to join our Seed Network if you haven't already, and join the thousands of like-minded women where you can make friends, promote your business and share your stories. We have lots of exciting Power of Seven and Seed workshops and retreats coming up later this year. So just plug into seednetwork.com and you can find out more. Until then, see you next time on Frankly Speaking with Lynne Franks and Friends.